In the heart of Manchester's old courthouse, a tension hung thick in the air. The room was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of papers and the soft tick of an ancient wall clock. Judge Richard Pembroke sat rigidly, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, his black robes a stark contrast against the worn wooden backdrop. Elizabeth Moore stood before him, her presence both delicate and strong. She was a woman in her mid-30s with skin the color of rich earth and eyes that spoke of countless untold stories. Her hands clutched a worn leather briefcase, a silent testament to years of research and passion. The charge was simple yet complex: civil disobedience. Elizabeth had blocked a massive construction vehicle, preventing it from destroying a small patch of green land on the outskirts of the industrial district. To some, it might have seemed like a trivial act of rebellion, but to Elizabeth, it was a critical moment in her lifelong fight against environmental destruction. Judge Pembroke studied her file, his glasses perched carefully on the bridge of his nose. He had seen many protesters in his years on the bench, but something about Elizabeth was different. Her documents revealed a brilliant academic background, a doctorate in environmental science, multiple published research papers, and a track record of community activism. Ms. Moore. The judge's voice was stern, carrying the weight of legal authority. Do you understand the consequences of your actions? Elizabeth stood tall. Her voice was calm, but filled with an unwavering conviction. I understand the consequences of inaction far more deeply, Your Honor. The courtroom fell silent. A few spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some nodded almost imperceptibly, while others looked away, uncomfortable with her direct challenge. The judge's fingers traced the edges of her file. Photographs showed the industrial site, a landscape of mud, half-destroyed trees, and heavy machinery. Elizabeth's protest had momentarily halted the destruction, drawing attention to the environmental impact of unchecked industrial expansion. Her research detailed how such projects disproportionately affected working-class communities. Pollution, health risks, loss of green spaces. These were not abstract concepts for her. They were real, lived experiences of people who had no voice. You deliberately obstructed a legal construction project, Judge Pembroke stated, his tone revealing a hint of disapproval. This is not how change is achieved in a democratic society. Elizabeth's response was measured. Sometimes, Your Honor, standing in the way is the only way to make people look, to make them listen. The judge shuffled papers, searching for the right legal language to address her actions. The fine would be substantial, a deterrent meant to discourage future acts of protest. He knew the system, understood its mechanisms of control. But Elizabeth was not intimidated. Her eyes remained steady, her posture reflecting years of academic discipline and grassroots activism. She represented a generation unwilling to accept environmental destruction as an inevitable cost of progress. The court finds you guilty of obstructing a legal construction process, Judge Pembroke declared. His gavel was poised, ready to seal her fate. The fine will be $5,000 payable within 30 days. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, a symbolic sound of legal authority, a momentary triumph of bureaucratic process over passionate activism. Yet, something in Elizabeth's demeanor remained unbroken. Her dignity was not a fragile thing to be crushed by a fine or a judicial decree. She represented a deeper, more resilient form of hope, the belief that individual actions could spark collective change. As she gathered her documents, Elizabeth caught the judge's eye. For a brief moment, something passed between them, not defeat, but a mutual recognition of complexity. The world was not simply black and white, right or wrong. It was a landscape of nuanced struggles, of continuous negotiation between progress and preservation. The courtroom slowly emptied. Outside, the Manchester streets buzzed with their usual energy, but something had shifted. A small act of resistance had created a ripple, a momentary disruption in the smooth machinery of industrial expansion. Elizabeth Moore walked out, her head held high, carrying with her the hope that one person's courage could indeed make a difference. As evening settled over Manchester, Judge Richard Pembroke found himself unusually restless. The courtroom scene with Elizabeth Moore played repeatedly in his mind. Instead of enjoying his usual routine of evening tea and newspaper, he sat at his home study, surrounded by law books and research materials. His computer screen flickered with Elizabeth's academic profile. Each document revealed layers of her remarkable work. She wasn't just a simple protester. She was a dedicated environmental scientist with impressive credentials from top universities. Her research papers detailed the devastating impact of industrial projects on working-class communities. Graphs, statistics, and personal narratives painted a compelling picture of environmental injustice. Pembroke realized this wasn't about breaking laws, but challenging systemic problems. One particular research document caught his attention. It described how industrial pollution in small towns created generational health problems. Children born in these areas suffered higher rates of respiratory diseases, while local economies collapsed as industries moved away. Elizabeth's work wasn't just academic. It was a passionate plea for environmental and social justice. She had documented how corporations often ignored the human cost of their expansion projects. Pembroke remembered his own working-class background. His father had worked in Manchester's textile mills, witnessing firsthand how industrial changes could destroy entire community structures. Those memories suddenly felt more connected to Elizabeth's mission. He scrolled through her photographs. Community meetings, research expeditions, peaceful protests. Each image revealed a woman deeply committed to creating positive change. Her approach was methodical, intelligent, and deeply compassionate. The $5,000 fine he had imposed now seemed increasingly problematic. Was he truly serving justice, or simply protecting corporate interests? His wife Margaret noticed his unusual concentration. "Something troubling you, dear?" she asked, bringing him a fresh cup of tea. Pembroke shared Elizabeth's story, describing her research and passionate commitment. Margaret listened carefully, her own background in social work providing additional perspective. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "true change comes from those willing to stand up, even when the system pushes back." Her words resonated deeply. Pembroke realized the legal system wasn't just about punishment, but about understanding complex social dynamics. He began making notes, comparing Elizabeth's research with existing environmental regulations. Her work highlighted significant gaps in current legal frameworks. She wasn't just protesting, she was offering comprehensive solutions. Her documented evidence showed how environmental policies often failed to protect vulnerable communities. Industrial zones were consistently placed in areas with lower income populations, creating long-term health and economic challenges. Pembroke's professional perspective started shifting. He saw Elizabeth not as a lawbreaker, but as a critical voice challenging an imperfect system. Her research included personal stories, families affected by pollution, children with unexplained health issues, communities struggling to survive. These weren't just statistics. They were human experiences demanding attention. As midnight approached, Pembroke realized he had spent hours studying Elizabeth's work. His initial judicial stance was transforming into a more nuanced understanding of environmental activism. He thought about the generations of legal professionals who had mechanically enforced laws without questioning their broader implications. Elizabeth represented a new approach, combining scientific research, legal understanding, and genuine human compassion. The fine he had imposed now felt like a small, insignificant gesture compared to the larger issues Elizabeth was highlighting. Her work demanded a more comprehensive response from society's institutions. Pembroke knew his exploration of her research was just beginning. Something fundamental was changing in his understanding of justice, law, and social responsibility. Outside his study window, Manchester's night was quiet, but inside a significant intellectual and emotional journey was unfolding. One courtroom encounter had sparked a profound personal transformation. Elizabeth Moore had done more than challenge a construction project. She had challenged an entire system's way of thinking, starting with one judge's perspective. As he closed his research documents, Pembroke felt a sense of anticipation. He knew their paths would cross again. And when they did, everything would be different. The night deepened, holding the promise of unexpected connections and potential change. The morning light crept through Pembroke's study, casting soft shadows on Elizabeth Moore's research documents. His journey of understanding was deepening, revealing layers of her personal history that resonated surprisingly close to his own experiences. Elizabeth's childhood story emerged from her research notes, a narrative of struggle and resilience. She had grown up in a small industrial town near Manchester, where her father worked in a massive manufacturing plant. Those factories were more than workplaces. They were the lifeblood of entire communities. Her father, William Moore, had been a dedicated factory worker for 30 years. When the plant suddenly closed, it didn't just end jobs. It destroyed dreams, families, and entire community structures. Elizabeth witnessed how quickly industrial changes could devastate working-class families. Pembroke's own memories stirred. His grandfather had experienced similar challenges in Liverpool's shipbuilding industry. Communities built over generations could collapse within months when economic winds shifted. Elizabeth's research documented the human cost behind industrial transformations. Families left without income, children's education disrupted, health problems emerging from environmental neglect. These weren't just academic observations, they were lived experiences. Her childhood photographs told powerful stories. Images of her father standing proud in his factory uniform, community gatherings, local football matches, snapshots of a world gradually disappearing. Industrial progress was eating away at traditional community structures. The pollution left behind was another critical aspect of her work. Rivers once used for fishing became contaminated. Green spaces transformed into industrial zones. Children's playgrounds replaced by concrete and machinery. Pembroke realized Elizabeth's protest wasn't just an isolated incident. It represented decades of accumulated frustration from communities systematically marginalized by industrial expansion. Her mother, Margaret Moore, had been a local school teacher. She had witnessed how environmental changes impacted children's health and educational opportunities. Elizabeth's passion for environmental justice clearly originated from these family experiences. The research revealed a pattern of systematic, environmental racism. Industrial projects consistently targeted areas with lower-income minority populations. Elizabeth's work meticulously documented these structural inequalities. Her academic journey reflected remarkable determination. Working multiple jobs, she funded her education, becoming the first in her family to obtain a doctorate. Each research paper was a testament to her commitment to creating meaningful change. Pembroke noticed how her scientific approach balanced emotional understanding with rigorous academic methodology. She wasn't just protesting. She was presenting comprehensive, evidence-based arguments for systemic transformation. Her personal story intersected with broader social narratives. Elizabeth represented a generation refusing to accept inherited, environmental injustices. Her work challenged existing power structures, demanding accountability from corporations and governmental institutions. The photographs of her community meetings were particularly powerful. Diverse groups, workers, environmentalists, local residents, united in their demand for sustainable development. Elizabeth had become a bridge between academic research and grassroots activism. Her father's unexpected death from respiratory complications further fueled her environmental research. What seemed like a personal tragedy became a catalyst for broader social investigation. Pembroke understood now that Elizabeth's courtroom protest was never about breaking laws. It was about revealing deeper, more systemic problems invisible to most legal frameworks. Her methodology was sophisticated. Each research project combined scientific data, personal narratives, and strategic advocacy. She wasn't just documenting problems. She was proposing comprehensive solutions. The more Pembroke explored her background, the more he recognized the human story behind the legal case. Elizabeth represented hope, a commitment to creating positive change through intelligent, compassionate action. His perspective was transforming. The rigid legal framework he had operated within for decades suddenly seemed inadequate. True justice required understanding complex human experiences, not just applying mechanical legal interpretations. Elizabeth's journey from a small industrial town to becoming a respected environmental researcher was itself a powerful narrative of resilience and hope. As afternoon sunlight filled his study, Pembroke realized this was more than a legal case. This was a moment of profound human connection, challenging established systems and offering a vision of more compassionate, sustainable development. The story of Elizabeth Moore was still unfolding, a testament to individual courage challenging collective indifference. The community center buzzed with energy on that crisp Manchester evening. Local residents, environmental activists, and community leaders gathered for a critical discussion about industrial development and environmental protection. Judge Richard Pembroke had decided to attend, something entirely unexpected for someone in his professional position. His usual evenings were spent in quiet reflection, not community meetings. Yet something about Elizabeth Moore's story had fundamentally changed his perspective. As he entered the room, conversations momentarily hushed. A senior judicial figure was not a typical attendee at such grassroots gatherings. Elizabeth stood near the front organizing presentation materials, her movements confident and purposeful. Their eyes met across the crowded room. No words were exchanged, but a silent understanding passed between them. Pembroke was no longer just a judge who had fined her. He was becoming someone genuinely interested in understanding her work. The meeting focused on the environmental impact of recent industrial projects in Manchester's working-class neighborhoods. Elizabeth's presentation was extraordinary, a perfect blend of scientific data and human stories. She explained how industrial expansions were destroying local ecosystems, affecting community health and displacing traditional working-class populations. Her graphs showed alarming trends, increasing pollution levels, declining community health indicators, and economic instability. Pembroke listened intently. Each slide revealed layers of complexity he had never considered during his years on the judicial bench. These weren't just statistics. They were human experiences documented with scientific precision. Elizabeth spoke about her childhood town, how industrial changes had transformed her community. She described rivers once used for fishing, now contaminated. She shared stories of families struggling with respiratory diseases caused by industrial pollution. Her voice was calm but powerful. She wasn't attacking industries. She was presenting a thoughtful, evidence-based argument for more responsible development. Her approach was diplomatic, intelligent, and deeply compassionate. During the question session, Pembroke unexpectedly raised his hand. The room fell silent. A senior judge asking a question was unprecedented in these community meetings. How can legal frameworks better protect communities during industrial developments? He asked. Elizabeth seemed momentarily surprised. Her response was measured and professional. She outlined potential legislative changes, community consultation, processes, and environmental protection mechanisms. Their interaction was respectful, intellectual. Gone was the courtroom tension. Here they were two professionals discussing critical social issues. After the presentation, Elizabeth approached Pembroke. Their conversation was surprisingly warm. They discussed her research, his legal experiences, and their shared concern for community welfare. "Your research is remarkable," Pembroke admitted. "I was wrong to simply view your protest as a legal violation." Elizabeth appreciated his honesty. "Change happens when people are willing to listen and understand," she responded. Their conversation revealed unexpected common ground. Both came from working-class backgrounds. Both understood how systemic changes could devastate communities. Both were committed to creating positive social transformation. Other meeting attendees watched with curiosity. A senior judge engaging so deeply with a community activist was unusual. It represented a potential shift in institutional understanding. As the meeting concluded, Pembroke realized his perspective had fundamentally transformed. He was no longer seeing the world through a narrow legal lens. He was understanding the human stories behind legal frameworks. Elizabeth's work had done more than challenge a construction project. It had challenged an entire system's way of thinking, starting with one judge's perspective. The community center's lights dimmed. Outside, Manchester's evening settled softly. But inside, something significant had occurred. A moment of genuine human connection that promised potential systemic change. Pembroke left the meeting changed. His judicial role was no longer just about enforcing laws, but about understanding the complex human experiences those laws affected. Elizabeth had opened a window into a more compassionate, understanding world. And he was grateful for the view. Months passed since that transformative community meeting. Judge Richard Pembroke's professional approach had undergone a remarkable change. His courtroom was no longer just a place of legal judgment, but a space for understanding human experiences. Anduin. A crisp autumn morning, he made a decision that would shock the local legal community. He called a press conference to discuss environmental justice and community protection. Elizabeth Moore sat in the front row, watching with quiet anticipation. "Our legal system must evolve," Pembroke declared, his voice steady and compelling. "We cannot continue to prioritize corporate interests over community welfare." He announced a significant reduction in Elizabeth's fine, publicly acknowledging the importance of peaceful environmental activism. More importantly, he outlined a series of recommendations for more comprehensive environmental protection policies. The local newspapers went wild. "Judge challenges industrial development practices," one headline read. Another proclaimed, "Legal system recognizes environmental activism." Elizabeth's research became a cornerstone of the discussion. Her documented evidence of environmental impacts in working-class communities was now being taken seriously by legal and governmental institutions. The Manchester City Council invited her to participate in policy discussions. Industrial leaders, who once dismissed her as a troublemaker, now requested meetings to understand her research. Pembroke's transformation was equally profound. He began lecturing at local universities, sharing insights about the intersection of law, environmental justice, and community welfare. His talks drew packed audiences of young legal students and environmental activists. Their unlikely connection had become a powerful symbol of potential change. A senior judge and a community activist had found common ground, challenging existing, systemic barriers. Elizabeth continued her research now with increased support and recognition. Her work expanded, documenting environmental challenges in communities across the United Kingdom. She was no longer just a local activist, but a recognized national voice for environmental justice. The $5,000 fine that once seemed like a punishment had transformed into a pivotal moment of social awakening. It represented the power of individual courage to challenge and change systemic injustices. Local community groups began organizing more effectively. Elizabeth's approach of combining scientific research with personal narratives became a model for grassroots activism. Pembroke's colleagues were initially skeptical. But as more evidence supported Elizabeth's research, attitudes began to shift. The legal community started recognizing the need for a more holistic approach to environmental protection. Schools began incorporating Elizabeth's research into environmental science curricula. Her story became an inspiration for young students, passionate about creating social change. The industrial corporations that once seemed untouchable now faced increased scrutiny. They were forced to consider environmental and community impacts in their development plans. Elizabeth's childhood town, which had suffered from industrial neglect, saw the first signs of positive change. Community health programs, environmental restoration projects, and sustainable development initiatives began taking root. Pembroke reflected on their journey. What had started as a simple court case had become a movement. Their connection proved that understanding could bridge seemingly insurmountable differences. During a joint interview, a journalist asked about their unexpected friendship. Elizabeth smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "change begins with listening and understanding." Pembroke nodded in agreement. "Justice is not about punishment," he added, "but about creating opportunities for positive transformation." Their story spread beyond Manchester. Other cities began examining their environmental policies. Community activists felt empowered, seeing how persistent, intelligent advocacy could create real change. The original protest that had led to the $5,000 fine now seemed like a distant memory. It had been a spark that ignited a much larger conversation about environmental justice, community welfare, and social responsibility. As winter approached, Elizabeth continued her research. Pembroke continued challenging legal frameworks. Their paths, once separated by a courtroom, now ran parallel, both committed to creating a more just, sustainable world. Their story was a testament to the power of individual courage, compassionate understanding, and the belief that positive change is always possible. Manchester had witnessed a remarkable transformation, not through dramatic revolution, but through quiet, persistent human connection and understanding.